Morning, everyone. I'm just trying to get my getting my chat going on YouTube. So give me a minute for that, and I will be back. Sometimes we have to confuse YouTube in order to get the things we need on the screen. I apologize for the delay. And let me just put in here, good morning, everyone. This is the week of Confluence 23, so this will be the last session for 2 weeks. We will be back 2 weeks from today, but next week we will be in Confluence, so we will not be able to be here. And I want to emphasize to you that this is the last chance to sign up for Confluence 23, which is going to be quite an impressive and important meeting. And many of our colleagues will be there. I'm unsure that whether Jordan will be there, because Jordan is works outside in Taos, New Mexico, as a tarot reader most days, and this is his prime time to make money to take him through the winter. So therefore, I'm not sure that Jordan will be in California with us. I hope he would be, but it's possible he won't. And I apologize for that, because it would be great to have him there. And what he doesn't know is that something is going to happen there, which will be of importance to him, and that will be announced here 2 weeks from today. So anyway, we're going to read The Way of the Cross today, and it happens that this particular day is January 27th, 1914. So again, it's only 1 month after Dr. Jung began his active imaginations and his work on what ultimately became the Black Books and finally the Red Book. He worked on it, all of it, for 15 years. And so the Black Books were his clinical notes during this month, this incredible month that he had. And then he spent the rest of his life talking about it and describing it, which became 20 volumes of the collected works. And a new version of the collected works of C.G. Jung is going to be published. And boy, I have a call that I might need to take, so I'm going to see what this is. So that was nothing. I apologize for that. I took a junk call, which I should never do during a session. And I apologize for the delay. Okay, so also there's a note here that let me correct. Well, let me explain these notes here to you. So at the beginning of this chapter, under the title, is a footnote, and it says Jung's marginal note to the calligraphic volume says, quote, 25 February 1923, the transformation of black into white magic, unquote. Okay, so that's what he was saying about 9 years later about this section. And again, the date of the beginning of this paragraph is January 27th, 1914. So 9 years passed before he put in that marginal note. And so, as I said, he's saying this is the transformation of black into white magic. And so this is him understanding the significance of consciousness and why this is so important and why the psyche is so important to what we're doing in the world, even today. I mean, even today with the Palestinian-Israeli war just heating up, all of that relates to the collective and the collective unconscious. And so we really need to understand these things. So let me read and we'll talk about it. I saw the black serpent as it wound itself upward around the wood of the cross. It crept into the body of the crucified and emerged again, transformed from his mouth. It had become white. It wound itself around the head of the dead one like a diadem, and a light gleamed above his head, and the sun rose shining in the east. I stood and watched and was confused, and a great weight burdened my soul. But the white bird that sat on my shoulder spoke to me, quote, let it rain, let the wind blow, let the waters flow and the fire burn. Let each thing have its development. Let becoming have its day, unquote. Let becoming have its day. And this refers back, among other things, to the very first chapter where Dr. Jung emphasizes that we should let life make the decisions, that life will find a way for something to happen. Now, it doesn't happen quickly and easily because the problem is that there are 8 billion of us. And so we clash, as the Palestinians and Israelis are doing right now. And from that clash of opposites, they're not opposite, but for this purpose they are, for the purpose of nation state, I suppose. From that clash, something new will emerge, and that is life. That's how life finds a new way to do things. And so the good news out of the clash, obviously there's horrible news out of the clash in terms of the death toll and so on. But the good news out of the clash is that something new must emerge. The same is true of the Ukraine war. The Russians had starved the Ukrainians to death in the late 20s and 1930s. and Stalin was taking their grain, which is Stalin's gold, and taking it up to Russia and leaving the Ukrainian people starving. And he was doing this by the strength of the Russian army and so on. And the result of that is that today, the Ukrainians just don't want anything to do with the Russians. And there's an excellent movie about this, which gives you a sense of how intense this is. It's called Mr. Jones, and it was produced in 2019. It's an excellent movie, and it parallels what's going on in Russia with the writing by George Orwell of Animal Farm. And it's very, very interesting to see that parallel. But when you see that movie, you understand two things. One, why the Ukrainians will never stop fighting, even if there's an armistice or some sort of truce. The Ukrainians never want the Russians to be controlling their destiny in the future. Even if there's a peace treaty, the war will go on, very much like the Palestinian-Israeli war has gone on now for 70 years, because the solution to the problem is, in a major way, the solution of the Gaza problem. There are 2 million people in Palestine, in Gaza, who have been basically in a prison camp for the last 70 years. And until that is in some way reasonably resolved, we're going to continue to see these clashes over and over again in repetition, as we have seen this week, but I've been seeing it for my whole life. And so, welcome, Jordan. Nice to see you today.
Good morning.
We made a start here. So we're on page 388, The Way of the Cross. How are you doing, though?
Good. I had network connection issues. I had to forget the network and sign in, and then it said no connection, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally it worked. So here I am. I'm good. How about you?
Well, I'm good. We're carrying through some last minute hiccups in the confluence, but we're ready to go. And
good.
And Wednesday I fly to California to begin the process. And boy, it's amazing how many things can come up. I'm not going to kvetch about what they are, but some of them can be pretty nerve-wracking. So one thing, if you do intend to come to Confluence, anybody, please do follow COVID protocols. This means doing a COVID test before you come. And if you get COVID during Confluence, we will have test kits you're going to have to withdraw. And we will have masks available for everybody who is there in case we think we need it. In my case, I've had the latest immunization, so I think I'm pretty good. I've been going to school for a year now, and I don't see many sick kids in school these days. Parents keep them home, thank God.
So, you're probably like the pediatrician, you bring everything home, but you don't get anything.
That's something like that. Well, I mean, Debbie and I have been very fastidious. She insists that when I walk in the door at the end of the day, that the very first thing I do after I get my contact lenses out is hit the shower. And so we've been very careful with that because we have her 93-year-old mother living with us, and we can't afford to have her get ill. But in any case, all right, so Jordan, I've done a little preliminary discussion here, but since I've only read one paragraph, I'm going to go back and read that again and give you a chance to comment on it before we go into the second part of the Way of the Cross.
Excellent.
So I'm going to read it again. This is the first paragraph of the Way of the Cross again. I saw the black serpent as it wound itself upward around the wood of the cross. It crept into the body of the crucified and emerged again, transformed from his mouth. It had become white. It wound itself around the head of the dead one like a diadem, and a light gleamed above his head, and the sun rose shining in the east. I stood and watched and was confused, and a great weight burdened my soul. But the white bird that sat on my shoulder spoke to me, quote, "Let it rain, let the wind blow, let the waters flow and the fire burn. Let each thing have its development. Let becoming have its day," unquote. Okay, any comments there?
Yeah, I love in the footnote, the serpent of my way, of that black serpent. So then I think from Debbie's lecture, that disappearing path, that darkness of no path, but then becoming that diadem, the crown. It's interesting because in a sense, then the disappearing path was his individuation through the cross, through the Christ, and then emerging from the mouth, meaning voice renewed.
Right. Okay. So going on, part two. Just where is the footnote? Okay. Footnote. Okay, there's a long footnote here, but I'm going to read the paragraph first. Truly the way leads through the crucified. That means through him to whom it was no small thing to live his own life, and who was therefore raised to magnificence. He did not simply teach what was knowable and worth knowing, he lived it. It is unclear how great one's humility must be to take it upon oneself to live one's own life. The disgusts of whoever wants to enter into his own life can hardly be measured. Aversion will sicken him. He makes himself vomit. His bowels pain him, and his brain sinks into lassitude. He would rather devise any trick to help him escape, since nothing matches the torment of one's own way. It seems impossibly difficult, so difficult that nearly anything seems preferable to this torment. Not a few choose even to love people for fear of themselves. I believe, too, that some commit a crime to pick a quarrel with themselves. Therefore, I cling to everything that obstructs my way to myself. Do you want to comment on that before we read the footnote here?
Sure. It reminds me of Jung's quote of, "If your path is easy, you're on someone else's path."
Yeah, very much so.
So I
right,
think too, but that you get used to the fact that, to me, chaos is just an abstraction of nature and kind of a relative facsimile average, because there really is none. Nature itself knows no order or disorder. It just is a command. It is just living itself into being continually. Right. And I think you get used to the embrace the suck part, and then it doesn't anymore, because then you dial into your own pace and your own rhythm. And then you notice all these synchronicities. The thing is, they were always there, but you miss them when you're not playing your own tune. And when someone says, "Oh, you're tooting your own horn," it's like, well, somebody's got to start the band. So, it's like, so it's, all the things we're taught to not speak up and not do our own thing.
Right.
Sure, that's great armature and training wheels, but then there's a point where you cut the cable on the glider and turn on the engine and fly. So I think this whole thing about the path, he would rather devise any trick to help him escape, since nothing matches the torment of one's own way. Yep. But then you get used to it and you realize it's not torment. It's just familiar things completely differently than anyone ever taught you. You have to teach yourself.
Right. And so Christ is the great exemplar of this in the Western world, because no one lived his life more fully and perfectly than Jesus Christ did. He, when he came into Jerusalem on the donkey, which was a symbol of divinity or humility, a symbol of his humility, he knew that he was going to be executed. He knew that he would be captured by the Roman authorities and executed. He knew that he would be betrayed. The donkey came when he came into Jerusalem, and he told one of his disciples to go get him a she donkey, and the owner will know what it's for when you take it. And the reason is that this was all a prophecy. I think from Elijah, maybe going back 500 or 600 years before the time of Christ. And so Christ was obviously familiar with the Gospels, or not the Gospels, but with Judaic knowledge prior to his time. And people did call him rabbi for a reason, which was that he was a very well-read person. And so he knew what the prophecies said, and he knew that it was describing his life. And so when he called for the donkey, he knew that the owner of the donkey would grant it. Because he said, tell the owner of the donkey that your master needs it. Okay. And that was actually part of this ancient prophecy that had occurred 500 or 600 years later, and had been passed essentially word of mouth down to Christ's time. And the point is that, you might try to wiggle out of it. For example, in the Garden of Gethsemane, which was the night before the betrayal, I think it's after the Last Supper, in fact, the disciples and Christ are in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is an olive garden just very close to Golgotha and the place he was later executed, and just outside of the Temple of Solomon, which is predated Christ by 1,000 years. Okay, predated Christ by 1,000 years. He asked his disciples to stay awake with him and to pray with him, but they all fell asleep. And he didn't know anything to do, but he prayed to his Father, God the Father, and asked, do I really have to do this? Is this really the way of my life? Do I really have to be tortured and executed on the cross? And the answer came to him from an angel, And that angel obviously was a psychological experience that he was having. And the angel said, yes, this is your way. And so he knew all along that Judas would betray him and that he would be arrested and ultimately executed by crucifixion, which was a sort of a standard way of executing people, very awful way of executing people in those times. And so Christ himself was living this. Okay, he's the exemplar for all of us, because all of us suffer in life. All of us have to make sacrifices in life. And if we try to avoid it, I mean, I'll give you an example just in my own life. I tried to avoid it for years by going to get more degrees from college. I mean, I literally became a lawyer and a MBA solely because I was trying to avoid what my destiny was. And even when I joined the Marine Corps in 1967, I was trying to avoid the destiny of my country at that time, because the choice was either be drafted into the Army and serve as a private. And one of my classmates in college did do that and was killed, or join the Marine Corps and work with the system, work within the system. And because my father was a career naval officer, I knew something about the system. And so I volunteered to be a Marine officer rather than be a private in the Army. And that led me to language school, which kept me out of Vietnam for an extra year and allowed me to survive, whereas my classmate and roommate from the basic school in the Marines died on April 11th, 1969. And it's a long story, but we all do this. Okay, we all try to avoid what it is that we're called to do. And finally, when I started to connect with Jung, I started to see that this was important for me. I started to see that 30 years ago, clearly. And I've been working on this project ever since, and I will never stop as long as I breathe, because this is my calling, what I'm called to do in my way in life. And so do you want to comment, Jordan, before we
Yeah, it's this kind of SOP, standard operating procedure story of here's the thing. I tried my damnedest to not avoid what I was meant to do, and all that did was interrupt what I was doing. That was the degrees and the career in architecture. And it's interesting because the discipline of the ritual, you're under deadline 24/7 in architecture. You live in the trench, basically.
Right.
And you may dress to the nines, but you're pretty muddy most of the times. And there's a certain refinement that cultivates. And I think then in 2005, when I began the 2-year, 3-year forgetting everything I knew about tarot and astrology, and I dropped Jung for that time, because that invariably would lead back to symbols and pictures, which would take me right back to the tarot. So I had to kind of mind like a fox, try to find the traps. But then the initiation of doing the tarot deck, then the architectural well-being, kintsugi of self, tarot and astrology for well-being, that's when it started to even out, where, all of these things that I was supposed to do that were avoiding what I really needed to be doing became foundational preparation. And then I realized, oh, I was trying to do what I was supposed to do without any idea of what it was, but I wasn't comfortable with it not knowing. I still had that addiction to certainty and who am I impressing and living by your CV and look at these awards. And I remember the day I finished the tarot deck, I looked at my office and there was a whole half a wall full of, commendment for share of community form and identity and all this and degree and all those certs. I loosened the screws on the back of those little metal frames so that the wire came up and I turned them all backwards.
Mm-hmm.
So they were facing the wall and I went, that's much better. But it wasn't until the point that I finished like 20 whatever of them and looked at it, I had this nice set of cascade, like I call them ablution tingles. Until that point, I still didn't know that I needed to just live my path into being, doing what I needed to do. So all through that, even when I knew to turn those around, there was kind of a commencement, a reverse commencement, to commence, to enter into your life of I graduated from needing to know. And then you got to learn to walk again because you don't know what to do. And you kind of sit there staring out the window for an hour or so thinking, my God, what have I done? I mean, at least have the kahunas to run off with the circus. I just sat here. I didn't even run off with the circus. What's going on?
Yeah.
So I think, that whole storyline with people's lives up to the point where you command to live your life into being, where then Judas, the labor pains of the birth of resurrection, you literally, in a sense, you betray what you've always known so you can fall in love with what you're supposed to do. And then you open up to birth the rest of your life. So I think we all have these stories, and I think these stories are wonderful to hear from everyone else because we all come at it a little differently, at different points. And even then, that's 2008 when, I'm finishing the deck and turning the certs and degree around. It wasn't until then 2014, 6 more years, I shut my architecture firm down, took a 5-year passage, and then woke up to, okay. So that, it's not, basically, I love Colleen's, there's no rootless flower, because there were no quick fixes that had shallow roots. There's just a lot of roots. So you don't see progress, but you have to stay the course to make it happen.
Right. Let me make a couple of other observations from the chat here. John T says an Olive Garden, not a restaurant. Yes. And if you're ever in Jerusalem, Jerusalem is in a kind of bowl, and it's at the top of a mountain. If you ever go to Jerusalem, you will understand its significance because it's quite high up above the Mediterranean Sea, and it's a natural fortress. And then inside it, and it might be the caldera of an ancient volcano, possibly. It occurs to me because it's in a kind of a bowl, and on one side of the bowl, you see all of these graves. It's a cemetery on one side of the bowl of people who think that they have to be there in order to be taken up to heaven. But from up there, there's a road that goes around past, I think it's Yeshiva University. You can look down into this bowl, and there it is all in front of you. You can see the Temple of Solomon, where the ancient Jerusalem was. that was actually a fortress that had been built up over 1,000 or maybe 1,500 years. And outside of it, you can see the Garden of Olives, and you can see where Gethsemane is from that point. And you can see where the old Roman part of Jerusalem is beyond the Temple of Solomon. We in the West know of the Temple of Solomon as the West Wall, or the Wailing Wall, where devout Jews go to pray. But actually, that temple is still largely intact. And if you go to the left, if you're facing the Wailing Wall and you simply look to the left, you will see what looks like the entrance of a cave. And inside that cave, you're only allowed in there by invitation, and you have to wear a yarmulke when you go in. And there are many devout Jews inside that cave praying. But there's a point where they've dug down, and you can see that the temple wall is actually 60 feet deeper than the ground level that you're standing on when you're standing at the Wailing Wall. So this was an enormous, enormous fortress. And where the Villa Dolorosa is now, is up to the left of the Wailing Wall, and that's where people went out to the dump. Golgotha was a dump, and they were just throwing trash over the walls of the city, the old city, for 1,000 years. And gradually the ground level worked its way up for 60 years, maybe 1,600 years. And so the ground level now is actually 60 feet above the beginning of the Temple of Solomon. So if an excavation were ever allowed in that area, they probably could excavate the entire temple, or most of it. But they haven't done. They only have this one west wall left where people go to pray. And then Anthony says, didn't Jesus chide the disciples for falling asleep? And so in essence, didn't they disobey a direct order? Well, I would say that Christ gave no orders. People followed him voluntarily, and he hoped that his disciples could stay awake, but they couldn't. And so, we see that in a Marine Corps platoon all the time, where somebody's given guard duty out on the perimeter, and they fall asleep, inadvertently probably, but they just can't hack it. And so you have to make sure that you put people close enough together so that if you have one of them that's fallen asleep, you can still defend yourself.
I think there's also a figurative quality or metaphor to the 12 disciples falling asleep, that all around him, he was the light, and he was the light shining from the unconscious, or the consciousness. And so I think with them falling asleep, rather than any kind of disobeying or disrespect, I think it's actually a natural environmental numinous quality that maybe fell across the whole room.
Right. And Avant-Garde says he is registered for Confluence. He or she is registered for Confluence and will be in California soon. Terrific. I look forward to seeing you there. Are you going to be able to come, Jordan? Yeah,
I'm
okay, that's what I,
getting the new engine this week, and that's really kind of hit the winter.
yeah. All right, well, thank you. You watch your text messages next week. Okay. And so anyway, let me go ahead and read this footnote. In Black Book 4, this is spoken by his soul. In this chapter and in scrutinies, we find a shift in the attribution of some statements in the Black Books from the soul to the other characters. This textual revision marks an important psychological process of differentiating the characters, separating them out from one another, and disidentifying from them. Jung discussed this process in general in 1928, in the relations between the I and the unconscious, chapter 7. Quote, the technique for differentiation between the I and the figures in the unconscious, collected work 7. In Black Book 6, the soul explains to Jung in 1916, if I am not conjoined through the uniting of the below and the above, I break down into 3 parts, the serpent, and in that or some other animal form I roam, living nature demonically, arousing fear and longing. The human soul living forever within you, the celestial soul as such dwelling with the gods far from you and unknown to you, appearing in the form of a bird. From Appendix C, page 577. The textual changes that Jung makes among the soul, the serpent, and the bird from the Black Books in this chapter and in scrutinies can be seen to be the recognition and differentiation of the threefold nature of the soul. Jung's notion of the unity and multiplicity of the soul resembles Eckhart's. In Sermon 52, Eckhart, we're talking about Meister Eckhart, wrote, the soul with her higher powers touches eternity, which is God, while her lower powers, being in touch with time, make her subject to change and biased toward bodily things, which degrade her. That's from Scrutinies or Treatises, Volume 2, which was translated in 1981. In Sermon 85, he wrote, 3 things prevent the soul from uniting with God. The first is that she is too scattered and that she is not unitary, for when the soul is inclined toward creatures, she is not unitary. The second is when she is involved with temporal things. The third is when she is turned toward the body, for then she cannot unite with God. Okay. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think the point of to change and bias towards bodily things which degrade her, I don't think it's a negative thing there, degrading. I think it's that she ages, she's alive, and so there's the life, death, creation, destruction that is that continual resurrection through life. When she's involved with temporal things of time, then that's again limiting, and you're kind of ticking off the moments that is absolutely not eternal. And when she's turned towards the body, the soul cannot unite with God, because then it's something that's infinite. So she's looking at the finite. But what I find interesting is kind of a contradiction where turned towards the body should be able to unite with the infinity of the inner divinity. So I find it the microcosm of the all in one and the one in all. It's kind of trying to be bucked off there with those three, but in one way I don't disagree with him. In another way, I feel like it's a little bit limiting. But then the soul, I think, penned as a she, that means the soul is generative, and the soul gives more life, and the soul being related with, or actually as, the unconscious is generative. So the healing powers of the unconscious are accessed by accessing the soul. And I think then the soul generates the spirit. So there's, I think, a lot going on in the footnote. That one, I think it's a little limiting, that when turned toward the body, the soul can't unite with God because the body is inner divinity. There's an inner infinity.
Right.
Same time,
And,
though, just make it up.
And I just want to point out that when one signs up for the military, any military, I mean, if you do it voluntarily at least, when you sign on the dotted line to be a part of some military organization, you're writing a check up to and including my life. Okay.
Mhm.
And that's regardless of what country you may be in. So any military person is expressing in that act the very willingness to accept the sacrifice of Jesus Christ in a way. And, we have this hymn, Onward Christian Soldiers, and what does that mean? Well, I'm not going to get into it right now, but that is a metaphor for what Christ did. Okay, in other words, I sign on the line, regardless of what military, because I am called to this and I am willing to make any sacrifice up to and including my own life.
And that's part of the origin of your life's on the line. That's part of the origin of your life's on the line, where you have committed to whatever action it is. So whether it's contractual or that you are simply doing something with your all, your life's on the line, literally, as a contract. And bless you. We don't hear it, but bless you. And I think then when he ends up saying, therefore I cling to everything that obstructs my way to myself, he's trying to get these things out of the way.
Okay, so let's read the next chapter then, because this is right on this point, or the next paragraph, which is paragraph number 3. He who goes to himself climbs down. Pathetic and ridiculous forms appeared to the greatest prophet who came before this time, and these were the forms of his own essence. He did not accept them, but exercised them before others. Ultimately, however, he was forced to celebrate a Last Supper with his own poverty and to accept these forms of his own essence out of compassion, which is precisely that acceptance of the Taoist in us.
Lowest.
What is it?
Lowest.
Oh, I beg your pardon, lowest. I have a mark in there, the lowest in us. Okay, and so this is from the Last Supper, thus spake Zarathustra. But this enraged the mighty lion, who chased down the lost and restored it to the darkness of the depths. And like all those with power, the one with the great name wanted to erupt from the womb of the mountain like the sun. But what happened to him? His way led him before the crucified, and he began to rage. He raged against the man of mockery and pain, because the power of his own essence forced him to follow precisely this way as Christ had done before us. Yet he loudly proclaimed his power and greatness. No one speaks louder of his power and greatness than he from whom the earth disappears under his feet. Ultimately, the lowest in him got to him, his incapacity, and this crucified his spirit, so that, as he himself had predicted, his soul died before his body. And there's a footnote here. In Zarathustra's prologue, a tightrope walker falls from a rope. Zarathustra says to the injured tightrope walker, "Your soul will be dead even before your body. Therefore, fear nothing anymore." And in Zarathustra, section 6, page 48, in Jung's copy, this is underlined. In 1926, Jung argued that this was prophetic of Nietzsche's own fate, the unconscious in normal and sick psychic life. And of course, Nietzsche died from syphilis after being put in the hospital for 10 years. Any comment?
Well, the footnote above too goes into the Zarathustrian lion that roared and clamored and leapt up to go back into the cave. And so in that sense, the inner animal, the natural animal voice had emerged, and then once made conscious, disappeared back into the abyss, so that the natural voice, I think, would reside within. And so I think there's an emergence of the unconscious in the form of the lion. And I see on some Jungian platforms right now, there's the lion that would become the man. And I think what happens is it's actually more important for the man to become the lion, to go back to nature, rather than for nature to be some rational, intellectual thing. Because I think here then with Zarathustra, yes, presaging his fate, but at the same time, I think there's the in a sense, a Janus kind of goddess of doorways, from to something emerging from the unconscious, making its message, and then returning, so that it's within, though, in the personal unconscious.
Yeah. So greetings to Wolf Olivier. I'm sorry I haven't been able to help you more. Wolf and I have been communicating about Mysterium Conjunctionis, and it seems that in the Dropbox, I have not put the videos. And so I do have those videos in my archive, but unfortunately, because of the coming of Confluence, I'm not going to be able to do anything to get those into the Dropbox before the end of October at the earliest. Kathy says, "Don't invite me to an anti-war rally, invite me to a peace rally." That's Mother Teresa, is a quote from Mother Teresa. Very appropriate right now. All right. Part 4, paragraph 4. No one rises above himself who has not turned his most dangerous weapon against himself. One who wants to rise above himself shall climb down and hoist himself onto himself and lug himself to the place of sacrifice. But what must happen to a man until he realizes that outer visible success that he can grasp with his hands leads him astray? What suffering must be brought upon humanity until man gives up satisfying his longing for power over his fellow man and forever wanting others to be the same? How much blood must go on flowing until man opens his eyes and sees the way to his own path and himself as the enemy, and become aware of his real success? You ought to be able to live with yourself, but not at your neighbor's expense. The herd animal is not his brother's parasite and pest. Man, you have even forgotten that you too are an animal. you actually still seem to believe that life is better elsewhere. Woe unto you if your neighbor also thinks so, but you may be sure that he does. Someone must begin to stop being childish. Okay, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll go from the end back to the beginning, that someone must begin to stop being childish, meaning stop trying to impress, stop striving, live it, and have the childlike connection where you feel the nature, not trying to be natural. And I think then I love you still seem to believe that life is better elsewhere. That whole figure of speech of the grass is always greener on the other side. Well, of course it is, because when you stare down at your own feet, you see through whatever it is to see the dirt. But when you stare at the other grass or in nature, you're seeing it at an angle. You don't see the earth, you just see all the verdant stuff, the growing stuff. So it appears more over there, but that whole, thou shalt not covet, and just insert any kind of nouns after that, not neighbor's wife or yard or career or whatever. Well, yeah, because it looks easy, because you're just seeing the surface. You're not seeing all the life under the ocean that went into making that happen. Right. So you're trying to escape, he's trying to escape the ground under your feet if you're, doing that.
Right. And so we see this in our global immigration problem right now, where millions of people a year are trying to come to the United States or come to Western Europe, instead of trying to solve their own problems in their own place. They think that they see, as Ronald Reagan had it, the shining city on a hill, and they say, oh, well, things must be better there than where I am, so I'm going to go and get a little bit of that better. And of course, in many ways that's true, but with, we still have our warts in the United States and Western Europe, surely, and certainly in Canada as well. And so be careful what you leave. And so what people are leaving is their own culture, their own place in the world, for something that they don't even really know. It's totally unconscious. They're just saying, I need to be there. And so we see it both in Western Europe and the United States, that people are attracted to it because they think that's the solution to their problem, and it really isn't.
And I think that and then add to that it's damn near impossible to be a prophet in your own hometown.
Yeah.
And I have no urge to be a prophet, but it's the kind of thing where the past will hold you back if you allow it to. And that can be, I think, unhealthy weightlifting of bad boundaries. You don't need to continue to appease or ask for permission. It's just like how families, can hold people back, because the last milestone is really what they remember you by.
Yeah.
And they'll keep bringing it up, and that interferes with the present if you let them, spread those nails across the road. And the reality is, it's continuing to communicate from your own bleeding edge and leading edge. And again, not to be a prophet, but to get to some place where what I'm doing now is what is received and known. And in a sense, you're building a new history.
Yeah. So Cherie asks a poignant question, which we must answer, and that is, what creates conflict? And this is sort of an essential issue in Jungian psychology. And the point is that all of psychic energy, all of it, is based on the opposites. And the simplest ones are the difference between men and women, I suppose. But there are opposites everywhere we look, the yin and the yang. And there are literally thousands of them, if not millions, at least thousands of them. And so, so conflict arises when people get overly hopeful about one side or the other and pull too heavily to one side or the other. And this obviously escalates up to the point of society itself. So we see this playing out in our red state, blue state duality in the United States, which, 150 years ago was blue state, gray state duality. But here in the United States, we see it very clearly in our current affairs. And the point is, and this has been known since ancient China at least, is that pulling and ancient India, because Gautama Buddha actually realized it and became enlightened because of it, is that if you pull too hard to the left or the right, you're not going to get what you want. You have to find a middle way. And the Buddha achieved his enlightenment after trying to do what a lot of Indian men had done for thousands of years, which is to make themselves as humble as possible, eat as little as possible, become emaciated, and don't take anything out of the earth or the earth's bounties. And the Buddha realized when he did that, and there's the famous jade statue from the 2nd century of the Buddha, the fasting Buddha, who's showing all his ribs and so on. That's when he was fasting, and it was only there that he realized that he was making himself weak, but he wasn't finding enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And it was from that he got up and went over to the Bodhi tree and sat down and achieved enlightenment, which is the middle way. And from that enlightenment come the 84,000 teachings of the Buddha, which is also represented, of course, as Kathy points out, in Chinese Taoist literature as yin and yang. We have talked about it time and again here, so I'm not going to go into it in any great detail. And Kathy says, life is love, not conflict. And, it's Jesus's dictum, live and let live. Love your neighbor as thyself. It's not that I got mine and I'm not going to help you get yours. It doesn't work that way. And all you have to do is look at our former president to see a person who is an unhappy man. Okay, and he's always been unhappy even before he became president, and so he lived the I'll grab mine and the hell with the rest of you since the beginning of his life, and he's the poster boy for that sort of living. But in the end, it doesn't bring happiness. You can't eat an airplane or a yacht, and if nobody will ride on them with you, where's the use of it? And so he can create the riches of Croesus. He can have the Midas touch, but remember, King Midas touched his daughter, and his daughter turned to gold. Okay,
Mhm.
and then he didn't have a daughter any longer, and
Well, and
so
that right there is a direct figurative example of the Midas touch starves the soul. So he robbed himself of that generative woman, his daughter,
yeah,
and which is a metaphor for his soul. So I'd say too, from what causes conflict, I would say an immature lack of healthy boundaries where one is always too threatened. I think the human body is actually the best metaphor. The trunk is thick and heavy, and the arms can flail around like branches off a tree. But if you have yourself centered in the middle, then you can reach to left and right, but it doesn't pendulum pull you off to then crash one way or the other. So I think that when you have disagreement, I don't find it's important to agree to disagree. I think that should be natural. I think what happens is when you disagree and it doesn't devolve into conflict, you learn more about the other person's perspective intensely without any need of agreement. And what happens is 6 months from now, if you and I disagree, I may come to you and go, hey, Skip, here's this situation. It's confusing me. What do you see? Because I know you will say something that I could never come up with because our perspectives are different. So I think what happens is conflict happens from a quick reactive tantrum. But like Viktor Frankl, there's a space between stimulus and response. And in that space, which is a personal unconscious, resides my emotional and psychological development at any given time.
right.
And so I think conflict happens when people are honestly being childish rather than having a childlike connection.
So Anthony says, isn't this natural tension the cause of conflict natural due to the duality we are faced with? Yes, we're faced with thousands of dualities all the time. And the opposites, the problem of the opposites is an opposite as something that we have to have and we have to live with, as the war between men and women says, vive la différence. We have to have that natural tension because that is psychic energy. I'm going to say it one more time. That is psychic energy. That's what makes the world go round. All of those dualities, all of those tensions put into a soup of a family, of a community, of a church, of a county, of a state, of a nation, of humanity itself. We have 8 billion of us, and all of us have thousands of dualities within us. And the alchemy of all of those things put together is what we're talking about here. That's what makes the world go round. So when we look at something like the Palestinian-Israeli conflict right now, we're seeing an eruption, so-called eruption, from that duality, okay? That the shoe that the Israelis have put on the Palestinian feet for the last 75 years, since 1948, that shoe pinches too tightly. And unless the Israelis find a way to not do that, we will have repeated examples of what we're seeing now. We've seen it, I don't know, a dozen times in my lifetime, and it doesn't change. And so, there's the old saw about I was walking down a street and I fell into a hole. The next day I was walking down the same street. I knew the hole was there. And I tried to avoid it, but I still fell into it. The next day, I walked down that street and I walked on the other side of the street, but I still fell into the hole. And finally, I decided to walk down another street. And And that is what we're talking about here, that the Israelis and Palestinians have to find another street to walk down, because the one that they're currently walking down, which they've been walking down for 75 years as a collective of the two nations, is obviously not working. They're falling into the same hole every time, so they need to find another street.
And I think the duality is actually, I think people get stuck on duality. And instead of right, and I think also rationally, they think duality means I have a right and a wrong decision. But rather than getting stuck on duality, which makes ambivalence and indecisiveness, I say to enter the duality, explore and inhabit the duality, and live it rather than having to choose. And what's interesting is then you have the both and that's a higher octane fuel to work with instead of you're right, I'm wrong. And with Israel and Palestine, the shoe pinching too tight is a great metaphor, because basically we gave you structure with stricture. Your shoe is too tight, instead of structure without stricture, meaning the human skeleton. It helps you move, but it doesn't get in the way. You hope. And so I think the problem is people duality, or dualism. It doesn't exist. It's a diagram. And the reality is it's both and all the time, instead of look at moral and immoral. Never do you hear more support for immorality than in religion. And, it's like, it brings up this concept to distract people from the eros and the erotic, the vital, which is life. And I think that duality gets in the way really too much.
And what are we fighting about? My ancestors came to this country in 1625. They were 5 of the first 150 settlers of Manhattan Island, or European settlers of Manhattan Island. Five of the first 150. And so roughly, 20% of that group. And why did they come? They came to escape a religious war between the Catholics and the Protestants. And, nowadays, nobody even remembers that. It's hard to remember because we accept Protestants and Catholics as just American in the United States. And yet we still have religious warfare going on and all kinds of other things. And so we have to wake up and find, smell the roses of this precious planet we live on, because it's the only one we get. And that's the container we get. We used to have containers that were the church or the nation state and so on. But in the 21st century, we have one container, and that is the earth. And we as a species have to find a way to find the middle way, so that as a species, we can live as one species and preserve our precious island in the sky, because that's what it is. And
well, I think going back to the whole generative piece and the resurrection that we're kind of talking about up and through here, there's the Gaia principle that you just brought up. The earth is a living organism. Mm-hmm. And I would add to that Golem, the Hebrew Golem, which is the male creative Gaia, as it were. And so you have a generative and a formative, and then they both don't get in the way of each other. Magma becomes lava when it emerges. It's generating, the earth generating itself continually. There's the both and I don't find any duality between magma and lava. I find generative and formative.
Right.
And that's important, I think, to understand that we live in a big garden. And if we keep paying attention to the weeds instead of just plucking them out, well, be careful about weeds, because weeds are just plants that gardener doesn't want to name. So,
Well,
they all have Latin something.
yeah. Okay, so Wolf said gives us a compliment which is worth reading. He says, congrats to both for this enriching project. For your example-based comments are particularly enlightening, and you make visible the collective unconscious at play in the U.S., fascinating for a non-American. And so,
Thank you.
Let me also add that this is exactly what we're doing at Confluence, because recognizing the collective unconscious is a major aspect of this project, okay, to understand what it means to have a collective unconscious. And so the significance, from my perspective, the significance of what we've done in Confluence since May the 7th, 2021, when Tim Holmes and I began Confluence. Since that time, and we didn't know we were doing it at the time, okay, but what we did know is that when we got together in November of 21 with 6 people, that we locked together in an amazing unconscious way. We didn't know what it was doing quite yet, but it solidified, it became important. Others saw it became important and were drawn to it. And then we performed Confluence 22 for the public in Helena, Montana. Who would have thunk it that we would have had an important conference in Helena, Montana, as opposed to San Francisco or Denver or one of the major meeting sites? And the answer was that we drew in many others. And so many of the people that were in Helena with us will be there again this coming week. And we already see that it's our role to have people experience the collective unconscious so that we know what it is. And that's what we're going to be doing this coming weekend, is we're going to do a series of things together which seals the deal on this idea, again, even more firmly, except this time we know what we're doing, and we know that our role is to give people the experience of the collective unconscious. It'll be the collective only of the group. So only those who are present are going to fully appreciate what it is, because it's largely unconscious. But we have people coming from all over the world, from as far away as London, to be with us, and they will become part of this cadre of people that is now becoming bigger and more important, and understanding where humanity has to go. And Jung understood this. He discovered the collective unconscious back in 1913, 1914. That's what we're reading about now, is his discovery. And it's covered at the beginning of the Red Book, so I'm not going to go back to it. But what happened was that people who became Jungian analysts, who followed the Jungian Institute approach, became Jungian analysts, but in order to practice psychotherapy, they also had to become psychotherapists in the Freudian sense. And then they could practice Jungian psychology as analysts, in, offering them as mental health themselves as mental health professionals. So they created a profession around working with individuals and helping individuals through the crises of individual life, but they did not. And Carl Jung did not himself try to explicate the collective unconscious very much during their lifetime. And the way I got into this more than 30 years ago now is I was asking myself, Jung, why, if you knew this stuff about the collective unconscious 100 years ago, why weren't you saying more during the times of World War I and World War II? And it took me, 30 years to work it out, why he didn't say much. And the answer is that he knew that one person alone speaking isn't going to persuade anyone. Okay, in other words, the Germans and the British were, going different paths, and him talking about the collective unconscious would have been so much chaff in the wind, and so he couldn't get anybody to pay attention. But now we can do it. Okay, now we've seen the consequences of letting it go, and now we can do our confluence in California next week as a demonstration to Jungian analysts and to the leaders of Pacifica Graduate Institute and Jungian institutes of how the collective unconscious itself can be demonstrated and trained, if you will. So hi, Kathy, you came aboard, so you must have something profound to say. I'll shut up.
Well, this is profound. I just wanted to hang out with you guys. Hey.
Hi. Welcome.
Hey there.
Okay, well, it's nice to have you here. Of course, you've been here all along. But do you want to add something to what I've said?
Well, I'd like to wish you a most wonderful magical confluence, first of all. Congratulations, getting yourself here to this time and space. Mm-hmm. It's been a year. Yeah. I'll be excited to hear about it afterwards. I don't do that kind of thing. I'm pretty averse to I don't know, leaving home.
Aren't we all?
I don't have agoraphobia or anything, but I haven't traveled like on an airplane for over 10 years. And I don't go places. If I need to go somewhere, I get in my car and I tool around and make myself happy. I mean, road trips are me. Right. But yeah, I know that it's going to be amazing. And I think that, I'm sure I'm not the only one having FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's wonderful to see your wall hanging there, believe in the magic, because.
Oh, that sign, I made that at one of those, when people go to those like paint and drink wine things. Mm. I don't drink anything ever, which doesn't matter. But it was a work thing with a Pilates studio that I work with at. And this was years ago. The owner of the studio, I'm still there, took us all to one of those like paint your own thingy places. Mm-hmm. And it was the only design I related to. So yeah, that's what I made. And it's in my Pilates studio. So
right.
Yeah, cool. That's my my reformer.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. Yeah. We've got this Pilates barrel. Yeah, so I'm in my what should be a person's living room. I don't have a living room. I have a Pilates studio.
Yeah. You have a studio.
Yeah. And magic is in terms of relevant to all of us.
Well, and so
Jung must have been in a constant liminal state. I think he must have been like having like constant, I don't know if he ever like actually exited. Maybe when he took a super cold shower or ate an amazing meal or something. But even then he was probably in it because at my age, at this stage, I find myself like there a lot more often than I'm not. I don't know about, other people.
And that's what we have to do. I mean, the point is someone asked a Buddhist master one time, Rinpoche, when do you meditate? And Rinpoche said, well, I'm always meditating. Okay.
Yes.
And that's what we have to do. I mean, we have the noise and the chaff of, for example, American sports. That's a big thing. Football is now on, and I haven't looked at a football game really, except for the Army Navy football game, for about 35 years. I got drawn back into it because of my work in the school system a little. Because
That's funny.
my school is across the street from the Navy Stadium. And so when the home games come, we park cars for $20 a pop for the stadium. And so yesterday I was working on the parking cars project. And that draws me into, okay, if I'm going to park cars for this football game, at least I'm going to go home and watch it. And it just emphasizes to me the fact that is a distraction. I mean, that is our distraction. And events of that kind have been used since, obviously, before the Roman Colosseum was built. And that's what's gotten humanity through in many ways. But the reality is that those are distractions. And the only people that are having an authentic life in the football stadium are the guys who are actually on the field playing the game. They're having an authentic experience. The rest of everybody in that stadium is having a vicarious experience. So they're living somebody else's life. They're living the life of those football players, but they're not having an authentic experience of life themselves.
Not of football, but I would love to interject that they're having the authentic experience of being a witness. And I think that,
being a what? I'm sorry.
A witness, a witness, they're observant, they're observing, they might be having a visceral experience based on their team loyalties and their multi-generational excitement in households. And so I wouldn't totally discount, their experience. They aren't experiencing getting dashed against helmets on the field, and they're probably glad. But as an empathic, a being, they might be experiencing, I mean, you can hear the hits, you can see the action. When you're actually in a stadium, you don't get that, monocular view of the game. I've been to one football game in my life, and I was like, wow, I can actually see what's going on, because you see everything. It's like, oh, you see the pieces over here moving, you see instead of just like what the camera's showing you.
Right.
And so we are here to witness each other. I think that would be as true as saying that we aren't having an experience when we're here with you. We are.
Right.
You're delivering the book, you're reading to us, for us, with us, you are guiding conversation. That is not to say our experience is inauthentic.
Right. Well, that experience is authentic, and I do my best, and I know Jordan does as well, to try to keep it authentic, not only for ourselves, but also to provide things that people will go back to their everyday life and
apply. Yeah. And I agree with the distraction piece too. I mean, in my mind, I hear bread and circuses.
Yeah, most of us can't live on a liminal space all the time. Okay, that's a hard place to be. And I think I do it maybe 80% of the time, 85% of the time today, and I recognize it as such. And I agree with you about Dr. Jung, that he was out there in his liminal space, and this building behind me, which he built with his bare hands.
I love that. I'd love to see the inside.
Yeah, nobody will ever let you look, though, I think.
I'm not
I don't
going
think-
anywhere anyway.
I know. I don't think the family will allow us to look inside because there are very private things there. But the point is that he was, during the whole time he was constructing that facility, which he spent a lot of time at, he was in a liminal space, very much so. And that's, and he, was moving his hands and he was doing the stonemasonry, but it was a way to make his hands busy while he was meditating. It is essentially what it was. So
And I think
go
there's an important point
Go
here.
ahead
I think
quickly.
there's an important point here about with society and with individuals, people in relationship, etc. How do you resolve conflict without a fight? So what's interesting is it doesn't mean it doesn't get heated or intense, but
It surely does. That's what alchemy
it does, but no need for a fight or a war. It's that, as Kathy said, the witness. When you powerfully witness someone you're close to going to 11, well, listen, because that indicates this is intensely important to them, and it may be something erupting from a long time ago. And like Rilke said, one of the most powerful forms of love is to protect your partner's solitude.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, what happens is that solitude is this private moment that they're given to express fully, no apologies necessary, and then settle back in. What's the goal? What's the message? And what happens then is it allows the life to fully expand and contract. And like Alan Watts said, breath is prayer. To me, breath is prayer enough. And it's a life-affirming spirituality where life itself is its own divinity. So I think how to resolve conflict without a fight. Now, it's a tall order and not always the right way to go, but at the same time, I think there's a dignity and difference that is guarded when that happens.
Yeah. Now I'm going to exercise the prerogative of the chair here, because I don't think we should leave this chapter incomplete for 2 weeks. And so I'm going to go in 2 tranches. There's about 4 more pages here. I'm going to read 2 of them. We'll have a conversation about it, and then 2 more, because I want to get to the end of this chapter so that we can next time start reading the next chapter, which is called The Magician. That's the name of the next chapter, but we have to get through this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read 2 pages. It's going to be a lot, but we can't discuss everything. Everybody has to go back and meditate on it themselves. We'll have a discussion then, and we will have a discussion at the end. And that way we can do it.
Let us know if you want help reading through it, Skip.
Okay, I may have to do that. But anyway, we're on page 391 in the collected in the reader's edition of the Red Book by C.G. Jung. Paragraph 5, your craving satisfies itself in you. You can offer no more precious a sacrificial meal to your God than yourself. May your greed consume you, for this wearies and calms it, and you will sleep well and consider the sun of each day as a gift. If you devour other things and other people, your greed remains eternally dissatisfied, for it craves more, and the most costly, it craves you, and thus you compel your desire to take your own way. You may ask others, provided that you need help and advice, but you should make demands on no one, neither desiring nor expecting anything from anyone except from yourself. For your craving satisfies itself only within you. You are afraid of burning in your own fire. May nothing prevent you from doing so, neither anyone else's sympathy nor your more dangerous sympathy with yourself, since you should live and die with yourself. Paragraph 6. When the flame of your greed consumes you and nothing remains of you but ash, so nothing of you was steadfast. Yet the flame in which you consumed yourself has illuminated many. But if you flee from your fire full of fear, you scorch your fellow men, and the burning torment of your greed cannot die out, so long as you do not desire yourself. 7. The mouth utters the word, the sign, and the symbol. If the word is a sign, it means nothing. But if the word is a symbol, it means everything. When the way enters death and we are surrounded by rot and horror, the way rises in the darkness and leaves the mouth as the saving symbol of the word. It leads the sun on high, for in this symbol there is the release of the bound human force struggling with darkness. Our freedom does not lie outside us, but within us. One can be bound outside, and yet one will still feel free, and since one has burst in inner bonds, one can certainly gain outer freedom through powerful actions, but one creates inner freedom only through the symbol. 8. The symbol is the word that goes out of the mouth, that one does not simply speak, but that rises out of the depths of the self as a word of power and a great need, and places itself unexpectedly on the tongue. It is an astonishing and perhaps seemingly irrational word, but one recognizes it as a symbol since it is alien to the conscious mind. If one accepts the symbol, it is as if a door opens leading into a new room whose existence one previously did not know. But if one does not accept the symbol, it is as if one carelessly went past this door, and since this was the only door leading to the inner chambers, one must pass outside into the streets again, exposed to everything external. But the soul suffers great need, since outer freedom is of no use to it. Salvation is a long road that leads through many gates. These gates are symbols. Each new gate is at first invisible. Indeed, it seems at first that it must be created, for it exists only if one has dug up the spring's root, the symbol. To find the mandrake, one needs the black dog, since good and bad must always be united first if the symbol is to be created. The symbol can be neither thought up nor found. It becomes. Its becoming is like the becoming of human life in the womb. Pregnancy comes about through voluntary copulation. It goes on through willing attention. But if the depths have conceived, then the symbol grows out of itself and is born from the mind, as befits a god. But in the same way, a mother would like to throw herself on the child like a monster and devour it. In the morning, when the new sun rises, the word steps out of my mouth, but is murdered lovelessly, since I did not know that it was the Savior. The newborn child grows quickly if I accept it, and immediately it becomes my charioteer. The word is the guide, the middle way which easily oscillates like the needle on the scales. The word is the God that rises out of the waters each morning and proclaims the guiding law to the people. Outer laws and outer wisdom are eternally insufficient. since there is only one law and one wisdom, namely my daily law, my daily wisdom, the God renews himself each night. I'm going to stop there for the moment. Comments, please.
Wow. That kind of really ties in, the question about, what creates conflict. It's almost like, well, what creates conflict is when we focus on the outer laws and the outer wisdoms. We get out of alignment with the authentic soul. And I'll stop talking there.
No, that's a great point. And I think this really dials into the whole idea of the scales and Ma'at, the Egyptian, goddess guarding the eternal afterlife, where your heart is weighed against the feather and the scale being the middle torso and the legs. And what's interesting to me is I always, when I was younger, I thought, wow, what a scam. I'm not getting in. My heart's a filet mignon or porterhouse, and that feather's a paperclip. How is this going to work? And then I finally realized the whole metaphor was when joy enters and you consciously give your heart enough breathing room, it becomes buoyant enough to fly with the fly and unweight the scale to unite with the feather. And so there's a heart married to the intellect so that the heart of the matter is always present as value. And I think he's talking about this where there's only one law and one wisdom. The God renews himself each night. And so I think the dreams are that part of the giving your heart unconscious breathing room that you wake up refreshed in the morning.
Right. Okay. At this point, I think we have to explain what a symbol is and why it's different from a sign. A sign is like a stop sign that you see on the street. It basically says, well, the government of this municipality or whatever decided that this would be a prudent place for you to stop your car and look both ways, right? But it has no psychological meaning. It just means that the government has said that this is a place you ought to stop and then move on safely. Okay, and the same works for a stoplight is basically a sign also. It's just a place that's a more complicated intersection, and so we have to regulate behavior and so on. And so that's what a sign is. But a symbol comes out of emerges from the opposites. Okay, when there is a conflict of any of the opposites, and we can take the red state, blue state opposites of the United States for this time, the result will be a symbol, okay? And I can't predict what the meaning of the symbol will be. Now, we can't predict it. But the symbols are or the two sides of the opposites are at odds, and the opposites have built up on both sides, and what you often see is what Dr. Jung referred to as enantiodromia, which is the tendency of things to become their opposite, because you're trying so hard to pull in one direction that all of a sudden you find, oh my God, I've become my parents, right? and so it's the old saw of how when you were a teenager you thought your parents were stupid, but by the time you were 30 you were amazed at how much wisdom they'd gained.
Yeah.
Right. And so, that's going over to the other side, right? And so if we pull and pull and pull, what ultimately will emerge is a symbol. Okay, and what emerged out of the United States, imperfectly, I'll say, but what emerged out of the United States in the Civil War was the theoretical end of slavery. Now, of course, we haven't ended slavery, and essentially we haven't ended it anywhere in the world, including the United States. We just call it different things. We now come up with a cockamamie excuse why we can throw a black kid into jail for 10 years, as opposed to comparing if you were a white businessman, you'd get $100 fine, but if you're a black kid, you'll get a 10-year prison sentence, and then they got you in the prison system, and they therefore get to capitalize on your work for $2 an hour instead of $15 an hour, which is what happens. The prisons have become manufacturing facilities that are done by slave labor, basically. That's what it is. And so we haven't done away with slavery, but in the very big picture side, we like to say that we did, and the end of the Civil War and what happened in the next 100 years, let's say after the Civil War, up to the late 50s, early 60s, was symbolic of the end of that conflict. Okay, but then that symbolic end started to fray, and now we have other issues, and we had other issues. We had the civil rights movement and so on, and so these things are happening, churning through the system all the time. But the basic idea here of a symbol is that when two things are conflicting, and one of them may be unconscious, and you're trying to fight against it, like you're trying to stay in school so you don't have to do this other thing, whatever it is. Eventually, school ends, and then what emerges is your career, however that is, whatever that is. And your career is a symbol of what went before. Okay, and so that's what we're talking about with a symbol. And so in dreams, we are, people have often have very complex, difficult dreams, and what you can know about a dream is that if you're having dreams like that, that means there's a conflict, okay, in your psyche, and you're.
The video froze right after conflict in the psyche.
Yeah, he can't hear you when he's frozen. He won't know till he comes back.
Okay. Your dream will give you the answer, and when that answer comes, that conflict in the psyche, then that's a symbol, and that's what your psyche does, is it produces symbols for you of what it seeks. It's not what you seek, it's what your psyche seeks. And you can pay attention or not, but if you don't pay attention to it, it's going to get you another way, and you're going to keep dreaming until you get it, until you grok it. And so Dr. Jung pointed out that toward the end of his life, he didn't dream anymore. And I find the same thing is happening to me.
Wow.
I don't dream anymore, or very rarely, and very just piff puff little dreams that relate to something that went on today. But I no longer have these big dreams. I mean, I used to have them a lot, and well, and now I just don't have them anymore, because I've learned that I have to pay attention to my inner self and what I'm seeking, right? And that, that's notwithstanding, the pushes and tugs of everyday life, which happen around us all the time. But I'm talking about the big issues that are causing mental health breakdowns and suicides and depression. All of those things are symbols of the fact that you haven't resolved stuff that you need to resolve. And fundamentally, all those things represent that. And where our friend Khushbu Kantaria, who works as a suicide prevention counselor, she's sort of like the escalating top level of that. Gave me an example one time where a woman was considering suicide, and it was because she had been forced to live in the home of her husband's parents, and her father-in-law was abusing her, and so she was considering suicide because of that. And Khushbu says, well, why do you give yourself over to that awful man? Just leave and have a new life, go to a safe house and build a new life, because if you stay in that house, probably you will commit suicide. But if you find a solution, you can't find a solution in that environment, so you have to find a different way. You have to find a different road to go down, and not fall into the same hole every day. So Jordan, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'll use an archaeological example for sign versus symbol. If I find a pot shard or a piece of a fossil, it's a sign, which is a significator or significator of the all, but it's a piece. The symbol is a portal to the all from a specific whole system. So, for example, the Ankh, the everlasting life symbol, well, that takes me into life. It takes me into everlasting life. It takes me into, wow, what's this? And there's magic there. Whereas if I just see a piece of the corner, I'm like, oh, what's this little gold thing? It's just a sign. So I think signs can be steps or significators, and then symbols are whole little universes to themselves that connect with the whole of the rest of the universe.
And there's always the mystical, no matter how much you mansplain away everything, which is what Freud wanted to do.
Yeah, he had a crack level addiction to
the reality is that the mystical is still going to be there. Okay, It may be different because of the mansplaining, but it is still there, and it's still unexplained, and you still have to live with it. Okay, Kathy, one more chance before I read this next piece. And do you want to say anything more about what we were talking about?
The only thing that keeps flashing through my mind is the guy who runs the stop sign. Is that the Eight of Wands?
I would
That's
say
all I got, man.
The Eight of Wands would probably be the guy who sits there and falls asleep at the stop sign.
Right. Okay.
No, I don't think so. The Eight of Wands is all about speed in my world. Like, that dude needs to slow down.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to read on to the end of the paragraph, or the end of the chapter here, and then we can close out with the final discussion of this. The God appears in multiple guises, for when he emerges, he has assumed some of the character of the night and the nightly waters in which he slumbered, and in which he struggled for renewal in the last hour of the night. Consequently, his appearance is twofold and ambiguous. Indeed, it even tears at the heart and the mind. On emerging, the God calls me toward the right and the left, his voice calling out to me from both sides. Yet the God wants neither the one nor the other. He wants the middle way. But the middle is the beginning of the long road. Man, however, can never see this beginning. He always sees only one and not the other, or the other and not the one, but never that which the one as well as the other encloses in itself. The point of origin is where the mind and the will stand still. It is a state of suspension that evokes my outrage, my defiance, and eventually my greatest fear, for I can see nothing anymore and can no longer want anything, or at least that is how it seems to me. The way is a highly peculiar standstill of everything that was previously movement. It is a blind waiting, a doubtful listening and groping. One is convinced that one will burst, but the resolution is born from precisely this tension, and it almost always appears where one did not expect it. But what is the resolution? It is always something ancient, and precisely because of this, something new. For when something long since passed away comes back again in a changed world, it is new. To give birth to the ancient in a new time is creation. This is the creation of the new, and that redeems me. Salvation is the resolution of the task. The task is to give birth to the old in a new time. The soul of humanity is like the great wheel of the zodiac that rolls along the way. Everything that comes up in the constant movement from below to the heights was already there. There is no part of the wheel that does not come around again. Hence, everything that has been streams upward. Hence, everything that has been streams upward there. And what has been will be again. For these are all things which are the inborn properties of human nature. It belongs to the essence of forward movement, that what was returns. Only the ignorant can marvel at this. Yet the meaning does not lie in the eternal recurrence of the same, but in the manner of its recurring creation at any given time. The meaning lies in the manner and the direction of the recurring creation. But how do I create my charioteer? Or do I want to be my own charioteer? I can guide myself only with will and intention, but will and intention are simply part of myself. Consequently, they are insufficient to express my wholeness. Intention is what I can foresee, and willing is to want a foreseen goal. But where do I find the goal? I take it from what is presently known to me. Thus, I set the present in place of the future. In this manner, though I cannot reach the future, I artificially produce a constant present. Everything that would like to break into this present strikes me as a disturbance, and I seek to drive it away so that my intention survives. Thus, I close off the progress of life. But how can I be my own charioteer without will and intention? Therefore, a wise man does not want to be a charioteer, for he knows that will and intention certainly attain goals, but disturbs the becoming of the future. Futurity grows out of me. I do not create it, and yet I do, though not deliberately and willfully, but rather against will and intention. If I want to create the future, then I work against my future. And if I do not want to create it, once again, I do not take sufficient part in the creation of the future. And everything happens then according to unavoidable laws to which I have fallen victim. The ancients devised magic to compel fate. They needed it to determine outer fate. We need it to determine inner fate and to find the way that we are unable to conceive. For a long time, I considered what type of magic this would have to be. And in the end, I found nothing. Whoever cannot find it within himself should become an apprentice. And so I took myself off to a far country where a great magician lived, of whose reputation I had heard. Okay, and so the place that he's
Cliffhanger.
going is the magician. Go ahead, Kathy.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I really resonate with the fact that he's saying that will and intent disturb life. And I think that that's important, because I think the two verbs I would use would be command and live. So, nature has no intent and nature has no will. It very much Zen, capital I, is. And I think in that, the two closest verbs I can find in the English language are infinitives: to command, not bossing people around, to command, as in, this is from my identity. The surface and my actions come from the substance, and to live things into being. Because I think too much intent and too much will, and that's, life is what passes you by when you're too busy making plans.
Yeah. And we'll talk about the meaning of life just for a minute. Okay. I got angry with Joseph Campbell about 20 years ago when I was very much enamored with Joseph Campbell. But because when he answered a question, what is the meaning of life? He said, oh, there's no meaning of life, as only a New Yorker could say. There's only the experience of life. Well, that's not true. And Joseph Campbell was wrong about that, because the meaning of life is the meaning of your life. And each of us needs to find that meaning in whatever way we use to find it. And there's not one answer, because all of us are different. All of us have different backgrounds, different religious faiths or the lack thereof, and so on. But in order to live a happy life, we need to find what gives us meaning, and or as Jung put it at the beginning of the Red Book, we have to find our own myth. And by finding our own myth, we will find what the future is. Okay. And so I'll offer a myth for you right now, which isn't necessarily yours, but it is mine. And that is that what is the United States now was saved by God as nearly an empty territory for thousands of years. Okay. There were no human beings in North America before 35,000 years ago, none. And the people who are Native Americans came to these two continents of North and South America, primarily across the Bering Strait Bridge. There was a land bridge that disintegrated 11,000 years ago. So before that time, they came across for a couple tens of thousands of years, and then that land bridge disappeared for geological reasons, and so these lands, which we call North and South America, were saved until a time when we could have what we have today in, let's say, the United States is my example, which is a true clashing. I mean, the human species has clashed every which way but loose all over the world, okay? And so there was clash between the Native Americans and the Europeans. There were clashes among the European tribes, the Irish and the Germans, the merry minuet of the Kingston Trio comes to mind. They're rioting in Africa, they're starving in Spain, there are hurricanes in Florida, and Texas needs rain. The whole world is festering with unhappy souls. The French hate the Germans hate the Poles, Italians hate Yugoslavs, South Africans hate the Dutch, and I don't like anybody very much. And so we can be thankful and tranquil and proud, for man's been endowed with a mushroom-shaped cloud, and we know for certain that some lovely day we will set the spark off and we'll all be blown away. They're rioting in Africa, they're starving in Spain. What nature, or they're strife in Iran. What nature doesn't do to us will be done by our fellow man. Okay, that's the words from the Kingston Trio's merry minuet. Okay, so we've been living this merry minuet, all human beings everywhere, since the beginning of humanity. And the clash together has created various things. But in the United States, the diversity, we've basically imported brains. Okay, the smartest people who were turned off by their own country for some good reason, whatever that reason was, decided to come here. And so those were smarter people who came to America, and they clashed. But if we look around ourselves in the United States, we don't clash, in the grocery store or the drugstore or pretty much anywhere else. I mean, there are eruptions because there are conflicts and there are opposites, but largely we manage to live in peace. And it seems to me that is the magnet, the golden thing that we have that others don't have, is this diversity. If you look at it, almost any other country except for Canada and Western Europe, most countries are very same. They're not diverse, terribly diverse, and we in the United States have become a stronger nation because of it. It's not that we don't have our flaws, surely we do, but the record speaks for itself. The last 400 years, people have been attracted here like a magnet. And we see it on our southern border this very day. And my ancestors 400 years ago came for the same reason. And, that clash of opposites and differences has been what has made us stronger and what others find attractive. And we need to find ways that people can find their own country attractive so they aren't incented to leave their country. We'll know we've succeeded when we only have a few people coming across the border because they're related to people who are already here, and not because they're starving or because they don't have a way to live. And so instead of spending $1 trillion on a wall, what we need to do is spend that same amount of money trying to help the countries where these people are coming from. That would be a lot more powerful investment. But when I am in a group and I find someone different in that group, I think to myself, oh, thank God, because they're going to have different ideas than I will have. And so we will have a different result. We will have a symbol that comes from all of our ideas rather than one idea which could be wrong-headed for 200 years, right?
Right.
Which is what we see in Palestine and Israel. I mean, we just see the wrong-headed attitudes repeated over and over and over and over again. And what the world needs is for some diversity to be introduced to that situation such that a new symbol can be created in that part of the world.
And I think with that example, I mean, holding grudges is really unhealthy weightlifting. Right. You're just dragging a dead bag of unresolved issues that if you simply don't avoid them when they occur, and engage, not militarily, engage with the intensities, culture to culture. Even in a monolithic culture, there's difference within. And so I think that whole carrying grudges and being all snippy and tantrumy, well, wow, why do people kill each other over misunderstandings? And that's petty, and it's just, frankly, it's a nonchalance to value. I think it's just omissive to anything of value. Instead of, wow, you really disagree. Cool. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate knowing you more because we can disagree. And I think then what happens is that's just like a free creative influence. I see that you have other perspectives that could be valuable for me not to get stuck in mine. Or it could confirm mine more to me and lead me to turn around and enrich it. So I think all these things that are going along, it's action, reaction, action, reaction. What about sitting down and not having a quick fix and making the no rootless flower bloom over time?
Right. And so, it is true that many of us human beings, many in humanity, have known this for millennia. Okay. The Chinese knew it when they developed yin and yang. The Indians knew it when the Buddha walked the earth. The Semites knew it when Christ walked the earth and started to change people's attitude and perception. And, I want to refer back to, I'm not going to try to find it now because it'll take me a couple of minutes, but I want to refer back to my friend Tim Holmes's beautiful statue called Returning the Nails. And the point of that for me is that society, the rigidity of society, the nails that nailed Christ to the cross, represent the rigidity of society, and we have nails in every which way but loose. If we just think about it for a minute, every law that we pass is another nail into our common humanity. And so we need some of those in order to be able to live civilly together. Okay, some of those, we need rules and rationality in order for civilization to hold together. But by the same token, when in the statue, when you have Mary, Mother of God, handing the nails back to the Roman authorities because iron was a strategic metal at that time, and so they couldn't afford to give up their iron. They had to recover it from the cross. Mary is handing the nails back, is returning the nails, and saying metaphorically, or in unspoken words, here are your nails. I will carry the future with me. Okay. And yeah, you can kill my son's body, but you cannot kill his spirit.
And that's reminiscent of Tiananmen Square, where then the families of the students who were shot were sent bills for the bullets.
Right, exactly. And so, that behavior of China, it can't go on. It can't go on forever. It can go on for a time. And we have to remember Mohandas Gandhi's dictum when he was fasting almost to the point of death to end some riots in India. He said, there have been tyrants, and for a time they can seem very strong, but in the end they always fail. Always fail. Think of it, always. And so the point is that we can have a large percentage of our U.S. population, a large percentage of the population of Western Europe, where people think that authoritarianism is a solution, but it cannot be a solution. Mm-hmm. It will make peace at the point of a gun. Okay, it will do what Hitler did to Germany,
and it desiccates the diversity, which de-enlivens the value.
Right, and so we have to have our diversity, and we have to respect our fellow human beings. That's very simple. And there's no choice about that. In the end, tyrants can rise, and we could have a tyrant rise in this country if we're stupid about how we handle our election the next time around. We could have that. But if the authoritarian wannabe loses next time, we demonstrate that we're moving on from that. Okay. If he wins, then we will have a very bad period in our country for decades, possibly. But in the end, it will fail. That authoritarianism will fail. And it simply is archetypal, and there's no way around it for them. So no matter how tightly they tie the boot, And they can't stop us from loosening it eventually.
I'm gonna need to go ahead and boogie.
Okay, me too. So thank you everyone for being here. Let me I will quickly look at a few things on chat here, Jordan, but if you want to pull out, you can.
Okay, thank you. Have a great week at Confluence at the next weekend.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Talk to you later.
Thanks, Kathy.
And thank you for joining us, Kathy, today. It was great. Let's see what else we have. And Renzo says, well, I doubt that Carl Jung would look at it in this manner. It's what you're suggesting when someone is drawing you want to teach them how to swim instead of throwing an inner tube. Well, yeah, we have to teach people how to swim, and that's what I've been trying to do for the last. I have no agenda to speak of here. I'm only impressed by what Dr. Jung said, and I'm interpreting it based on my own life. And you can take it or leave it, that's for sure. And Justin says, yep, all long-lasting empires were tolerant, not the short-lasting. And Sherry says, the poor in spirit suffer from none of these, either because they never had them or because of spiritual consciousness. Well, yeah, that's what we're trying to get at this coming weekend. Is we're trying to get at what is the collective unconscious. And mind you, in Confluence, it'll be only the collective unconscious of the group. But I think that we're on the wrong track. If we can have people viscerally understand, experience the collective unconscious within that group and show it, which we will do because we will have physical mementos of it, then others.
I think you meant to say you think you'll be on the right track.
I think
you said you think you might be on the wrong track. Yeah, you'll be on the right track in that case.
I'm sorry if I said that. I didn't mean it. We'll be on the right track of helping people see that we have to live in community and there is a collective spirit to it. And, you know, what I've seen since Tim and I had our meeting on the 7th of May in 2021 is that something was created. I didn't know it at the time. It's only in retrospect that I can look back at it, but I am very pleased to note that a lot of the people who have been with us since the beginning are still with us. Okay, that's a sign of success. They didn't just come and go away and say, I don't want any more of this. They are coming. And I don't want to say anything more about it than that because some participants' privacy is at risk. But what I will say is that they are attracted to what we're doing and we want to be a part of it. So anyway, and Sherry says, thank you, Wolf, for your wish. Sherry says, they've gotten rid of the love of money, fear of public opinion, and the disapproval of friends and family. Absolutely. You know, and that's the essence of what we have to do. We have to find a way for that to work for all of us. And so I have to close it at this point. Next time, which will be 2 weeks from today, the chapter will be The Magician. And that's where Jung is going with this. So I look forward to seeing you then. Peace, everyone, and thank you for being with us, Kathy. Bye-bye.